Brian White. I am the director of the International Students and Scholars Office at Lewis and Clark College, and happy to welcome parents and tell them a little bit about what we do. The main purpose of this office is to welcome, integrate, advise, and support international students who come to Lewis and Clark from outside the US, as well as third culture kids, those who have grown up in a country other than their passport country because of their parents' work. We work right now with about 120 international students that come here on F1 student visas. We also work with visiting professors and research scholars who come here on J visas. And as I mentioned, with TCKs, many of whom are using American passports, but have grown up for part or all of their lives outside of this country. We provide help from the time that students apply for admission to the college, through their orientation and adjustment here, academic advice. We are the main contacts for work with work on student visa applications, any kind of immigration issues that students have. We also help the international students with their responsibilities to file US income taxes. We try to be a one-stop shop for international students and TCKs on the campus. But one thing I want you to remember about us is that we want international students and TCKs who come to Lewis and Clark to have the full experience that everybody else does. We don't want them to have a separate, smaller side experience. We want them fully involved in the life of the college. So that's our goal when we're working with your kids, to help them achieve that. And now I'm going to pass things over to the Associate Director of our office, Bridget Flaherty.
Hi, I'm Bridget Flaherty. As Brian said, I'm the Associate Director of ISS. Brian explained a lot of what we do, and both Brian and I serve as advisors to the international students and help them with all of the different immigration, academic advising, and other things that they need help with. One of the things that I specialize in with our international students is helping them with the visa rules related to employment. So students typically come to me if they plan to do an internship while they're here, as well as to apply for the eligibility to work in the US after they graduate. And I also advise the International Students of Lewis and Clark Board, which we call the ISLC. Tobias, one of our students who's the president of the ISLC, is also going to speak about that in a few minutes. But the ISLC is basically the international student branch of the student government here. And now I'm going to pass it off to Paula Dennis.
Hello everyone, my name is Paula Dennis and I'm the Administrative Assistant in the International Students Office. In my role, I keep the International Student Office organized. I help international students during the application process and during their time at Lewis and Clark with different types of documents, paperwork, and everyday needs. In general, I assist Brian and Bridget and direct students to other resources and offices on campus as needed. I help the ISLC board during ISLC sponsored events on campus. This brings me to the introduction of Tobias, the president of ISLC for the 2020-2021 academic year.
Hello everyone, my name is Tobias and I'm from Denmark and I'm a rising senior who is majoring in environmental studies. I want to talk about two things really quick. One of them is how I, as an international student, interact with the International Students and Scholars Office. And quite frankly, I interact with them on a quite multi-layered level and in a lot of different ways. So I go to the ISS office to get help with my taxes, to get help finding work on campus, to help figuring out immigration, which is very prevalent right now. Also just questioning in regards my major and kind of the future of my education here. But it's also very like a comfort space for a lot of international students who often go to the office that's open every weekday just to have a conversation and just to talk with all the staff members there. And it's just kind of the base for all international students whenever they feel the need to feel safer or have something clarified. The other thing I want to talk about is, as Bridget mentioned, my role as the president of the International Students at Lewis and Clark Government. So the ISLC is a branch of the overall student government, and our main goal is to represent international voices at Lewis and Clark. We do that through organized events, such as like a pumpkin carving event, or like a future event, which is called the International Fair, which when your students will get here, it'll be much more defined. But we are also advocating on a more political level to raise concerns that international people have to departments on campus, to the administration, so the administration of the school is more aware of international students' health and well-being.
Thanks, Tobias. So I just want to point out a few things, resources that are available on our website. And so if you just go to our main website, let me just see, if you go into the search bar and type international students and search for that, the first thing that's going to come up is our website. And on there, on the right side menu, you can see that there is a lot of information for students, but there's also information specific to parents and families. And we have things organized here according to categories. You can look through this and see what type of information you're trying to find. A lot of this is available to the students as well, but there are things that are specific to parents and families. One thing that I do want to point out is if you scroll down to where it's the confidentiality, grades, and performance. So our office is not allowed to share information with parents and families unless the students give us permission to do so. This is because there's a regulation in the United States that we call FERPA. It stands for the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And basically it protects students' privacy. But if you go to this link here, permission for ISS to share info about your student, you'll see that there's a form here that your student can fill out, sign off on, and then that would give us permission to share information with you as their parent or family member. There's a lot of other information that's available on this site, and I just want to point out too that there is emergency contact information. That's how you can find out how to reach out to any of us if you need to do so.
Thank you for sticking with us and learning about the services that we offer in international students and scholars. We really look forward to working with your students. That's why we're here. If you have questions, if you have concerns, we want to hear from you. Our contact information is also on that website, and we can't help you if we don't know what you want to learn about us. But we have great expectations for your students and can't wait to see them here. Thanks for your attention.